Do albums still matter? Yes, albums still matter. Even in the age of singles, there are many benefits to releasing albums and why you should keep them a part of your release strategy. So, in this episode, we're going to dive into all of that. So, let's get to it.
You're listening
to the CD Baby
CD Baby
CD Baby
DIY
Musician
Welcome to episode number 308 of the CD Baby DIY Musician Podcast, where in this episode, we're going to be talking about why you should still be releasing albums. And my name is Kevin Bruner. Joining me is Chris Robley. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm good. And in fact, I'm literally putting the finishing touches on a new album. And when I say finishing touches, my engineer is waiting for me to resend one track that's already recorded. I have no excuse except just laziness for not exporting this damn file to send to him so he can finish the mixes on a new album.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Perfect timing. Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons that we're going to talk about today about albums and why they still matter. We get asked this question a lot on the podcast. And yeah, my band's working on a new album. And, right now, though, Chris, I am basically in full on practice panic mode for a quick mini tour that we're doing in a couple weeks.
Which you decided to book right before our conference, which
perfect.
We're also in not cram, what would you call it? All hands on deck mode for that, of course.
Yeah. I like to torture myself. It's summer. I should be taking time off to relax, but no, the opposite is happening, but it should be good. So reminder, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so. If you're watching on YouTube, click that red subscribe button and give us a thumbs up on the video if you're liking what you hear. And if you're listening on a podcast app or Spotify or anywhere you enjoy podcasts, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. We've been dropping them almost every week, and they've been getting rave reviews, Chris. Rave reviews.
It's true, though.
They are. They have been.
You sounded like you're being self-deprecating and sarcastic.
No, we are getting, people are loving it. So I just want to make sure they're subscribed and don't miss any of the goodness. So there's lots of, looking at our agenda of what episodes we have coming up. I think the hits just keep rolling because there's so much to talk about these days. You mentioned the conference. Want to give a solid shout out for the DIY Musician Conference. It is happening this year in real life or online, whichever you prefer. You can join us in Austin, Texas, August 26th through 28th. That would be the preferred method of joining. But if you can't make it to Austin or don't want to travel or can't travel, you can join us online. The same ticket gets you access either way. We try to keep this conference as affordable as possible. So tickets are much less than you would go to any other conference. You can get them at DIYmusiciancon.com. We've got an amazing lineup. We still have some performance opportunities available. We're looking for a band for the live band makeover. That's back by popular demand. That's one of the most popular sessions we've had in the history of the conference. We've got some great keynotes. We've got enormous amount of sessions covering just about every topic, from music production to marketing to booking to all of that good stuff. Plus, you can jam with people in our jam room. You can meet collaborators and network, and you just have amazing access to industry professionals that whole weekend. And so much of the music business and your success is about who you know and the relationships you build. And that's one of the reasons why we think this conference is so important and important for you to be there. So go get your tickets, DIYmusiciancon.com, and you're going to want to stay in the hotel. The Hilton is the hub, the Hilton in downtown Austin. And if you book 2 nights or more at the Hilton, we'll give you your ticket for free. And all that information is on the website. It's going to be a good time.
I was going to say, if anyone listened to the last episode of our podcast, you heard us give a preview of a lot of those keynotes and sessions, things we're looking forward to. If you haven't heard it, and you're just kind of curious to get a rundown of what to expect, go back and listen to that episode. But a related note, we also have a new article on the DIY Musician blog, which you go through some of that same information. And it also has the form you'd fill out if you want to volunteer to be the live band makeover brave guinea pig. Fill out the form. Doesn't mean you'll get it, but that puts you in the running. We'll look through, and there's a few criteria that the person who runs it needs you to meet. But anyways, that'd be a place to go if you are interested in having that experience.
Yeah, and we keep adding showcase opportunities, and we give those to people who've bought tickets. So if you want in on the action, you need to go on over to DIYmusiciancon.com, get your ticket, and we hope to see you in Austin, Texas, August 26th through 28th. All right, so here's what we're going to cover today. Here's our little table of contents. We've got the benefits of releasing an album. We're going to talk through that. Then we're going to talk about how to successfully release an album and some strategies around that. And then we've got some listener calls. We've got some good ones. So you're going to stick around for the whole episode. So let's dive in, Chris. You put together this great list of benefits of releasing an album. Any backstory or anything you want to dive into before you get to the list?
Yes. Here's the backstory. I hear from so many artists who will write or in conversation be like, albums are dead, and they are absolutely certain of that fact. They think it is idiotic to waste any time making these things, releasing these things. They think it's a singles driven market. They see that reinforced in how Spotify, sort of prioritizes the way you pitch singles. And you and I have talked a lot about the benefits of frequent release schedules, which means a lot of singles. Yes, all that's true. However, they're completely wrong in being so dogmatic about never making albums. And I think there are at least 8 reasons why they're still super important. So I wanted to talk about those today.
Yeah, it's a question we get a lot. Should I still release albums? And I think the resounding answer for those of you who can't wait for the punchline is yes. and we will get to that, all the reasons why. So let's start with, you've got a good list here, the benefits of releasing an album.
Yeah. So the first big benefit of releasing an album is that you get to create something that is a demarcation of kind of the next phase of your musical evolution. That's reflected in how albums get positioned out in the marketplace. The second one is you want to make them probably. If you're an artist who likes digging into your own artistry and, committing a lot of time to making a bigger statement, you want to make them, and your own fulfillment as an artist is important. You should listen to that voice. A third benefit is focus. Albums, of course, do take probably a lot more time, money, and creativity to create, but there's also something that happens when you make a concerted effort to make something larger and you commit the time and resources to doing it. You can actually be more productive. You get more done for that time. Albums give you just increased marketing opportunities. They're more of a rare event, so you can build more of a special story around it. Along with that is it's way easier to make physical media around albums. You don't press vinyl and CDs for singles, but with an album, obviously you can. This gives you way more merch opportunities. Generally, people don't make merch or make a lot of merch around singles releases. Happens too frequently. But with an album, because you have so much musical content, so much lyrical content, and you might even have so much design content with the various aspects of your physical CD or vinyl that you're creating, you just got way more stuff that can inform mugs, shirts, hats, books, whatever else you want to make. Again, because albums are rare, they also make it easier for you to get attention from the press and industry experts who would maybe otherwise tune you out if you were just pumping out a string of singles. And then the last thing is that an album gives you higher visibility on streaming platforms, because if you notice on Spotify, your albums get priority position in your discography and singles and EPs follow. So those are some pretty damn good reasons to make albums still, even though you should also, of course, be making singles.
Can I add a number 9?
Go for it.
My number 9 would be that you also get more streams, because your fans are going to be more apt to put a album on repeat than one song over and over and over again.
That is a good point as well. There you go. 9 reasons.
9 reasons, 8 plus a bonus. A couple of these things I think that are interesting here, because I like number 1, a bigger evolution in your music career. I think that one thing that people often overlook is that the creation process and making music isn't just about creating a product to sell. You want to make music that people enjoy, but it's also about you growing and expanding your creative experience, having growth in the creative process, having growth in your artistic abilities. And I think one thing that a lot of people suffer from in the just I'm going to just churn out singles over and over again is it really starts to become more like fast food, the creative experience. Not necessarily the quality of the content. I'm not talking about that, but I think when you go and create an album, you have this time that you're setting aside that you're really diving in and creating and building and growing. And that's something that shouldn't be overlooked as an artist.
Yeah, and
Um,
there can be a conveyor belt aspect to it if you're just I know people who do frequent singles aren't always home recordists, but a lot of times that is what's happening. So you fall into the same habits. Even if you're calling in session players, it might be the same set of people that are easier for you to access in this ongoing basis. Whereas setting a creative challenge for yourself and the time to do it with an album, I might be more likely to say, hey, I'm going to involve a small orchestra on this project. And that means if I'm going to hire them, I might as well get 5 songs out of it. So you're putting yourself into kind of, yeah, new musical and arrangement terrain as well. But then also in terms of it, like an evolutionary phase in your career, like if you look at Wikipedia bios, they're usually written, at least about musicians, they're written with phases that are named after the album. It's like, this was Dylan's freewheeling phase. This was Dylan's Blood on the Tracks phase. And that's still to this day. I think probably if you went to Billie Eilish's Wikipedia page, it might be broken up by her album releases.
yeah. Yeah. They are good at capturing a season of creativity for the artist where it's harder to document with singles, and sometimes singles it's more about let's just get this out there, let's just get this song out there, where when you're recording an album, yes, oftentimes artists are on a budget and they're just like cranking things out in the studio on an album as well, but there tends to be more of this like what's the creative vision I want to have for this movement of music. Another one that I'd like to tap into here that you have listed is increased marketing options. There's so many more storylines and things that you can do, marketing hooks, when you have a collection of songs going out at the same time. There's different storylines and things that might connect with different people, different songs that might have different playlisting options. There's just a whole lot of content to really benefit the whole of the group as opposed to when you release a single. So I think that's something that albums really can help, you know, make it easier in the promotion process.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about this later in terms of how to release an album successfully. But if you do it right, it does feel like an event and something important, not just for you, but also for the audience. So it's noticeable. Whereas if you fall into that pattern of doing a single every month or every 6 weeks or, even every other month for 2 or 3 years, it's just easy to get lost as a fan and be like, didn't they already put this song out? I don't know. Every time I open Spotify, there's a new song from this artist. It's just they get lost. So with albums, it just gives some shape to your audience's attention. And then I know I already said this in the list, but honestly, like one of the most important things is like you just want to make them. If you want to make them, make them. Like, yes, I know we're making music so it'll be noticed and purchased and all this stuff, but we're really doing it for ourselves. Like, so do what you damn well please with your art.
Yeah, when you finish an album, it just feels so much more substantial than when you release a song.
Yeah.
Like when you finish a song, it's like, that's great, that's amazing. But when you finish an album, it feels like I did something. I made something. It's there. It's 30 to 40 minutes long. It feels substantial. I accomplished something.
And if I
Anyone
don't,
can record a song, but I did an album.
yeah, and I've noticed if I do a string of singles without eventually bundling them together, I feel like they're all orphans. I'm like, oh, I have all these singles that just live out there alone. They need a home. So, even if there are things I recorded for the purposes of only being singles, eventually I feel bad for them and I'm like, oh, you need to be on an album. So Don't orphan your
Yeah.
songs.
Is it too early for a hot take in the conversation?
Never,
Okay.
never too early.
My hot take is this, that Chris, you just said that making an album is partly just about you. And I would say that's one of the main reasons for making an album. A lot of people think, oh, the industry's now a singles industry. It's almost always been a singles industry. If you go back in time in history, the 50s and 60s, the real emergence of the music business, the modern music business, it was all based on singles on the radio. The thing you'd buy at the store had an A side and a B side, had one song on one side and one on the other. It wasn't really until the 60s and really the 70s where the album format really emerged. So the way people consume music has always been driven by the one song that they hear wherever it is, whether it's radio or now a playlist, and that's the one song they want to consume. We just forced them to buy albums for a while. But what was so great about the rise of the album is it really drove artistic creation and really seeing music as a bigger compilation and creative expression. And so to me, the album has always been about the artist and less about how people want to consume. And so for artists, my hot take is that creating albums is really more about your creative expression and doing something bigger and broader and more creative than just how you treat one song. So to me, making albums is about you, the artist, and a bigger creative expression than it is just about how people consume music. And so much of the conversation is around consumption, where I don't think that's really whatever it really was about. Yes, the industry for many years enjoyed the fact that people would buy 10 songs when they really only wanted one, but that didn't change how fans were perceiving the music. That just forced them to buy songs they didn't want. And I think we're now in a situation where it's very clear that that's how it is. And so people don't have to buy songs they don't want. But as an artist, the creative aspect, the album still is a different level than just releasing song by song. So that's my hot take. And one
Yeah.
of the main reasons why people should still do albums.
You're reminding me too, like a lot of people who harken back to some golden age will say, like, oh, in the 60s, it was all albums all the time. And they'll point to the Beatles, which then reminded me, like, the Past Masters albums, it's two full volumes of things that were pretty much never on albums. Not
Yep.
entirely, but like all their singles that they released as hit singles that never had a home on an
Yep.
album because they also happened to be making albums at the same time. So they almost are exploring both lanes. They made the full album statements and then they would record these singles that lived on their own.
Yeah, if you think about if you go look at Billboard's top rock albums of all time or Rolling Stone's top rock albums of all time or just top albums in general, they're going to be an album that has more than just one good single. It's going to have either multiple great singles, but it's also going to have most likely something that defined a sound and really propelled music forward. It's harder to do that with a single. And part of it is just that people were making these in this creative mode that really was driving and pushing things forward. And a lot of what the Beatles were doing, you mentioned the Beatles, is like recording technology was just changing so fast during that time, from being 4 tracks when they started to having, I don't know, probably like 16 when Abbey Road was recorded, and just getting creative. And so the idea of the creativity in the studio and what you can do and how that can translate between songs was really this new art form. So I think when you think about singles only, you lose that kind of art form of creating a broader sound that can translate between multiple songs and make a movement of music and an expression that's greater.
Yeah, and I think it's a good reminder that not every song needs to be a single, and not every song needs to be an invitation to new audiences. Like, sure, you want to have some songs that are always going to be winning new fans and listeners, but once they get to your profile and they get deeper into your playlist or your recordings, like, it's perfectly fine to have a song that some playlister would tell you is awful. Why is this song 16 minutes long and have a 4-minute intro? Well, yeah, that's a mistake if you expect every song to be a single, but it's totally fine from your own perspective as a creative person.
That's a good point, because I feel like the album format is the perfect format for people to take creative risks. And when you only release singles, the pressure is going to be on not taking creative risks, to doing the the thing that you think is going to play well commercially, and
Mhm.
that stifles yourself as an artist, where you want those songs where like on our last album we have a song that I know people would either hate or love because it's very outside the ordinary for us. It would be very weird to release that song by itself, but to me, it's one of the most moving songs we've ever released. By itself, it would not make sense creatively in the context of our band, but in that scope of an album, it adds that context that makes it make sense that people can see where we're going and go that deeper spot with us.
Mhm.
Um, One of the other things on your list that I think is so important with albums is physical media. People still want it, whether it's vinyl or CDs or tapes or whatever you do, you're going to need an album. No one's going to spend $10 for a single on a CD, and it's not going to be worth your time to make it. So, physical media is still a great way to drive revenue for your music career, and you're not going to be able to do it without albums. In fact, I've had fans reach out to us and express frustration because of we've released some singles and they don't exist on CD and they
You
don't
orphaned them.
y-
See, you need to give them
we
a home.
yeah, you mentioned press opportunities. That's something that we've seen some change. If you go back in the history of the podcast, I think we made at least I know I did at one point made a crack about no one's going to do a single release party. Those do happen now, but it's not much for press to write about, or for them it's not as big of a deal if you just have one song coming out. Sure, if you're Beyonce or some megastar, that's a different thing. But you think about opportunities that independent artists have for press, reaching out to your local press and saying, I've got a song coming out, that can be like, huh? What? Tell me when you got an album, or when you've got some sort of catalog or some success patterns that I can write about. But writing about one song on for a new artist is going to be challenging. It's not impossible. It's just going to be more challenging.
Well, yeah, it's like setting the bar kind of low. And that doesn't mean your single isn't a work of genius. It might be an amazing track, but like the ease by which 60,000 other people that same day release singles means just like, okay, big deal. You made a song. Call us when you have an album.
Yeah. I could see a future, probably not going to happen. I could see a future where is a big return to releasing albums, because the barrier to entry for making a song is so low these days. There's apps that'll basically do it for you, that the idea of releasing a song, nobody cares. And this releasing an album being like a differentiator between artists that actually create music and people that just use apps to make it through AI, a song.
Yeah, my daughter will have her iPad and she'll be like, "Want to hear a song I made?" And she'll play it. I'm like, "You didn't make that. You just told GarageBand. You made some choices in GarageBand that gave you 60,000 samples to not 60,000, but whatever, I'm like, that iPad made that music." But
Yeah. Let's talk about how to successfully release an album, because there are some differences than just dropping songs. And let's dive into that.
yeah, I wanted to kick off this list by saying that we should acknowledge times have changed and it is harder to get people's attention even with albums. It is harder
Yes.
to convince people to purchase your music even if you've gone through all this stuff to make a great product. So, yes, people's attention and expectations for what they want from music are different. However, it's still more than possible. It's something you should be trying to do to create albums worth purchasing. And so then I would think like that phrase, you can, what is it? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Well, if that's the case, just make the river or the lake look as attractive and clean and delicious as possible. So this is a list of ways to do that. And the first thing is, when you're still in the creative process, I think record way more songs than you need for two reasons. One is you can trim the fat and make what ends up on the album as strong as it can be. But also, if the stuff that doesn't make the album is still of a sufficient quality, that gives you a way to have your next year of releases planned out that can harken back to the album, so you don't just drop the album and then disappear.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that an album doesn't mean it's every song that you have recorded. It's like an album can be the best of a collection of songs that you recorded. And then you've got extra content that can be dropped as singles around it or as follow-up material. Like, here's the stuff that we felt didn't quite fit in with the rest of the songs, but we think they're great, but we think they have a better life on their own. So having
Yeah.
more than you need is good.
Yeah, and if you don't have enough, the second point I wanted to make is that remember that an album can be an EP. And so that may negate one of the things we mentioned earlier about it showing up as an LP on your Spotify, at the top of your Spotify profile. But for the purposes of like you're finishing a big project and you want to make physical vinyl or CDs, like an EP, something that has 4 to 6 songs is totally reasonable. I've seen a lot of artists lately release what they call albums and they charge full price. It might be $15 for the CD or 20 something for the vinyl, and it really is just an EP. So clearly they're doing it successfully. Their fans don't care. So yeah, give yourself that out if you feel like you can't get 10 or 12 great songs.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point to make, because as we talk about albums, the digital world has provided this weird experience around EPs. Spotify creates theirs in a separate area, and it's like this collection of songs has one less song, so therefore it's a second class citizen. It's just weird. Yes, when we say albums, it doesn't mean it has 10, 12, 15 tracks. It could have 8, it could have 7. I think it's more about you're presenting a collection of music that you feel goes together.
And although we've been talking about albums as opposed to singles, I think one of the keys to building anticipation and kind of promoting an album in advance is to have some of those songs come out as singles beforehand. So, 2, 3, maybe 4 at the most of the singles that end up on the album come out every 6 weeks or so in the months leading up to it.
Yeah, and the benefit of that, and I think the real power of where we're at in music marketing and promotion, we've talked about on this podcast that I really look at it is now, instead of a release day that you're in a season of release, having a couple songs off the album to set up the album release builds anticipation. It allows you to tap into more of the tools available to you. Spotify for Artists only allows you to pitch one song every, I think it's 28 days. So when you drop your album, you only be able to pick one off that to promote to Release Radar and to their editor's pitching tool. But if you use a couple of the songs to set up the album, then you can have each of those pushed to Release Radar. I'm not sure what the rules are with Amazon Music, because they have a pitching tool now that actually allows you up to 2 weeks after the release to still use that tool. But those things that just multiplies your release power when you have a couple songs off the album that you set up, like 2 months out, you drop one song, 1 month out, you drop another, and then the album comes out. And then you've really created this anticipation, this season of release, this time period where you have lots of new stuff to talk about. It's being pushed out to your fans, and there's just general excitement around it. And you're excited too. That's an important thing, because then you're
Right.
getting hyped and amped up for this sort of roller coaster ride, which is this build up to the release and then all the things that come after it.
Yeah, that kind of leads into the next one in terms of energy and excitement, is make each of those advanced singles feel like an event. So don't phone it in, put in a ton of effort, whether that means, you're creating a lot of video content or you're running ads or whatever you would do it for each of those singles, because they can exist as standalone tracks. You probably have a lot of sort of marketing angles to explore. But if you can, remember, they don't all need to be these disconnected islands. Like if you can build a bridge between each one so that eventually the traffic all flows to the album, whatever that means to you, whether it's in messaging, the aesthetic of the album cover, the story you tell for each song, make it feel progressive towards the bigger project so that you have both the flexibility of promoting only one song at a time, but each of them eventually lead to a full story.
Yeah, exactly. This is one of those things where I think it takes time and effort to plan. Like when we're always telling people, they come to us, "Hey, I've got a new album out or a new song, and I want to release it next week." I'm like, "You can. We could do that for you, but why would you want to waste all this opportunity?" We have so much, especially related to what you just said at release.cdbaby.com, which is our release plan generator. It's a free tool. All you do is you drop in your release date and it tells you what opportunities that exist for you in the release process based on your timelines. And things disappear if your release is next week, it's not going to show you many options because you don't have many options.
Yeah.
But I think this is one of those things where artists get ahead of themselves and it's like, okay, the album's finished. Take a deep breath. I know you want it out immediately. I know you're super excited about it now and you want everyone to hear it right this second. Take a deep breath. Now let's get strategic. Let's plan a release date. Let's plan backwards for a couple songs. And then we can think about all the content or the storylines or the things that we have to support that and build that story up to the release. Because if you've been consumed by the mix process, the mastering process, that's not the best time to make decisions. So it's like take a deep breath and now go into, I want this to be as successful as possible. I want to have this release have impact. Let's shift gears, let's re-energize and then plan based on how we're going to make this fly the best way it can.
Yeah. Well, speaking of planning, that sort of leads to one other thing I wanted to tell people is don't spread your story thin time wise. And what I mean by that is like it's perfectly fine to plan your release out 6 to 12 months in advance. But once you start telling the story publicly of your album, I would get the album out, the full album out within 3 or 4 months of that. There's two ways I see artists making a mistake and kind of spreading the story thin. One is that thing of like, oh, I'm going to release a song every month for 12 months and then I'll put the album out. And I think that's way too long to be building and expecting your audience
Yeah.
to follow the threads. So when the album comes out, again, people are a bit confused. They're like, didn't all these songs already come out? I don't care. The other thing is taking a break mid promotion. And so this came up. I was talking to a friend who really wants to get her album out this year, but she doesn't think she can start doing that until September. And then she's worried she's going to run into midterm election kind of attention deficit, which then will immediately be followed by Thanksgiving and Christmas distractions. So she was considering with her publicist and her manager, like maybe I'll do 2 singles before all that, September and October, and then I'll wait and put out another single or two in January, February, and get the album out February, March. And I think that might make sense on paper, but then really what you're doing is asking journalists or bloggers or whoever in the industry to take notice, and then you go away and go in your Christmas cave for 3 months. Then you come back and then they're like, wait, didn't we already tell this story? So in either of those scenarios, I think it's a mistake. I think once you start, you should get your album out within 3 or 4 months.
Agreed. Agreed. And this is what some of the stuff you talked about there is one of the biggest mistakes I see artists making as it pertains to release is that they have an album's worth of music and they have what they consider an album and they think, oh, it's a singles world. I'm just going to spend the next 12 months releasing one single each month. And I'm like, and then at the end, release it as an album. Like, one, that is way too long. You will lose interest. All your fans will lose interest. And by the time you're at track 10, which is going to be a deep album cut, are you really going to, like, again, we talked about earlier, the context that an album provides for certain artistic expression that will be lost in that? It's like, no one's going to care at that point. It's going to be noise. They're going to say, this person's been talking about releasing music for a freaking year. Aren't
It'll
they
be
done
nice
yet?
to you and you'll be exhausted too.
And you will run out of hooks and marketing angles because it'd just be uninteresting at that point.
Yeah, I think
That's not what you should be doing. Like what you said, a 3 to 4 month timeline is a good one.
Yeah, and I think artists are prone to two extremes. One is that we finish the album and then we want it out tomorrow, and then we don't give ourselves time to do anything. And then the other is what you're saying. We think we can milk every last little song and every last little bit of attention for a year or more. And there's got to be a happy medium between the two. So it's not rushed, but it's also not just belabored.
Yeah, and I
Um,
even see this. This isn't just for independent artists. I see this play out with major label artists. They don't do the single every month for a year. They wouldn't do that. But I do see them like announcing, like one of the bands I love, Death Cab for Cutie. They announced, "We've got a brand new album. It's done. It's ready." And I'm like, "Oh, cool." This was like in March or something. I don't know. It just seemed like forever ago. And
Still not out.
it's not. It was like coming in September. I'm like, the way the world is now, I have no space in my brain for anything related to September.
You
All
think the
right.
world will be here in September?
Yeah.
Idiot.
To me, it's like, tell me when it's like 2 months away. And I know for major label artists, they have gigantic promotion timelines and windows that when you've got a big album that you got to make sure that there's not five other major albums dropping that day or that the press that you want lined up is on board. So there's a lot of things that they have to plan. So I'm not talking about that perspective. I'm just talking about as a fan, it felt like, oh, cool, there's going to be something new to check out. And it's like in September, I'm like, wah, wah. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not interested in September in, May. It's just too much, too much going on, too many other things to think about, and so much content and just, it's just stuff coming at us every day. Again, there are some reasons to do that, but I think for the average independent artist, that 3 month to 4 month window is good to set up, get some singles, release the album. And when you have an album out or release music, even your diehard fans, you can see this pattern. They after a certain while, you can see them, they start talking about it less. They're not listening to it all the time anymore. And that's to be expected. That's why that one single a month for 12 months and then releasing an album idea to me is just dead on arrival, because even the artists or the fans that say you're their favorite artist, they can only take so much of it. I love pizza, but I'm not going to eat it for every meal indefinitely. I got to take some breaks. You got to throw some tacos in every once in a
Of course.
while.
There you go.
So, I mean, it's the thing of like, people have times where they're like all in, really focused, listening to a lot of your releases, and then they
They need a
have you
breath.
just in a casual mix. Yeah, they need a breath.
Well, the next section is kind of about branding, and I could probably talk through them quick, and then if you have comments, throw them in. But
Okay, yeah, do
the
that.
first is design an attractive album cover. And if there's ever a time to really concentrate and make something striking, it's for an album. You can kind of phone it in with singles because there's not that much writing on it. But for an album, particularly if this is going to end up on physical media, take your time. Make sure it says something about the songs or just looks really cool. And you can still design it yourself, or you can hire a designer, whatever's in your budget. But now's the time to really put thought into that. Same thing with your artist photos. Pretty much every time you put out a new album, it should be time to take new photos that kind of enforce the new aesthetic that you might have in the album. They don't have to be pro photos, by which I mean like you don't have to hire a photographer necessarily. They don't have to look slick and professional in that kind of old school way. I think what's important is that they capture some interesting moment, some vibe, or like your personality is really showing. And people's standards have gone way down in terms of visual presentation in a good way. I think that kind of DIY casual aesthetic gives us a lot more options in terms of your photos. But both with the cover art and your artist photos, you're going to want to have options, different dimensions, because all of that is going to inform your social media, banners, your website stuff, just your visual brand. And then as far as just your brand as an artist, it's probably time to reevaluate what your story is. What makes you tick as an artist? Why would anyone care? Who is your music for? Defining your ideal audience, all that kind of stuff about knowing who you are and knowing what your story is. It's the time to reevaluate. And when you do, you got to throw it all up on those social media profiles and on your website, which we can talk about optimizing your website in a sec. But did you have any branding comments?
I think all that's great. I think in the concept of an album, the one thing that all this ties up into is an opportunity to create a bigger experience that you're probably not going to do if you're just releasing singles, especially if you're doing them quickly. Where when you release an album, it feels like this is a giant brand upgrade. Usually you're upgrading all of that, like you just said, photos, the art. Usually that art in turns into key pieces that influence your website and your merch and all that. And I think the other thing that an album, in the concept of what you just said, also provides is opportunities to extend that brand experience into the merch. We've talked about merch stuff that album allows, but even like digital goods and songbooks and things like that that key off of the artwork and the release of the album that can be sold digitally. All those things are easier to do and just seem like an extension of the album experience, and it doesn't necessarily feel that way with a single. Yes, I have seen people rebrand their website over a single. I've seen all that, but the fact that there just feels like a more substantial release of music, that it feels more important and gives you those branding opportunities that I think feel more related and have more weight to them.
Yeah, it's like a good time to audit who you are online.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Exactly. It's a good time to adjust all your social media banners, your website, your merch offerings. It really is sort of the let's take stake in who we are, or stock, not stake. Let's take stock in who we are and look at what we've got and upgrade it all. And when you're dropping singles monthly, it doesn't feel like that type of event.
yeah, and if you want to go deeper on any of those things we just mentioned, there's resources on the DIY Musician blog. We've got articles about how to make your own cover art design that looks great, but also meets all the DSP guidelines. We've got stuff about taking better artist photos, band photos, or even working with a photographer and making sure you get out of that session what you need. And then in terms of telling your story, it's many years old at this point, but we have an episode of the podcast called the Authentic Artist Branding Boot Camp, which I think is probably just as relevant as ever in terms of just figuring out who you are as an artist and then how to tell people so they care.
Yeah, that episode is still completely relevant because the info in that I think is pretty much timeless.
So in terms of optimizing your web presence, we mentioned having new photos, a new vibe, a new bio, doing that audit and making sure your site reflects who you think you are in this season of your creativity. But there's also some very structural things you want to pay attention to. One of them is you want to make sure your new priority message is right there at the top of your homepage. So think about the one thing you want people to do. Is it buy your album? Is it to listen on Spotify? Whatever it is, it's not like there's a right answer to that, but make sure that call to action is there and supported with really compelling copy. That's very important. I would use whatever marketing tools you have, whether they be like pop-ups or announcement banners. Make sure all of that also reinforces the priority thing that you want people to do with your album. If you're going to run ads, make sure you have pixels or remarketing code installed on your website from whatever platforms you're running ads on. And then one other thing, not just about, you don't want to just add the latest stuff. You want to make sure you're culling any stuff that no longer supports who you are now. So maybe you have some old blog articles you read that or wrote that don't really feel all that relevant to your music these days, or some really old photos from like 8 years ago from some live show that like you have a different bass player. It's fine to just delete that stuff, or save it in Google Drive, but delete it from your website.
Yeah. 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 One thing that I don't see on our list, but I think goes along with some of the stuff that you just mentioned, is that when you release an album, I think that is also sort of a cornerstone of a new tour, a tour that's themed about that album. People expect that, there'll be new songs in the mix. It'll be a new presentation. That kind of thinking goes along with the album, where when you have just a drop in a single here and there, no one's expecting a big tour themed around that song. It could happen, but
Right.
it's not typically what we see, happening in reality, that it's substantial enough to key off an entire tour or theme.
Yeah. Well, part of what I think is important about when I was talking about culling and like sort of streamlining the site and using the marketing tools available to focus people's attention on the new album is just to get rid of distractions and just like kind of funnel people. And I don't mean in terms of a marketing funnel, like, although I guess it sort of is a similar principle, but just to get people focused on the thing you need them to pay attention to right now, which is your album. So kind of get brutal with removing options and top navigation pages and anything that isn't crucial.
Yes. Yes, exactly. We got to get into rapid fire
Okay, rapid fire
mode
mode.
here. What are some of the highlights that we need to hit
Okay,
as
so
it
I
relates
think
to albums?
this is one of the most important things, but the key to you getting anyone to give a shit about your album is that you're going to have something else to offer besides the album. It could be access. You're going to Zoom with them. It could be that they get access to unreleased tracks. It could be they can be part of your Thursday night cooking club and you go live and teach them how to make. I don't care what it is. It has to be something that they want in addition to the music that they feel is special, valuable, and also speaks to them in a way where they feel a part of this. So that when the album comes out, it's their own triumph as well. It's something they've participated in and they feel some connection. So, we could talk a lot about that, but we're in rapid fire mode. But just what else do you have to offer to package this album inside and then make your audience a part of that story? Your website will clearly be a way to tell some of that. Once they go through those experiences and it's time for them to purchase, you want to make sure your web store is all set up. And so we have an episode of our podcast called E-commerce 101 for musicians. Go back and listen to that about whether you're using Bandzoogle or Shopify or however you plan to sell stuff. You got to get that infrastructure all streamlined as well. We already talked about creating great physical products, but I think things to say is don't just make a CD or a vinyl, make a CD or a vinyl that's worth spending time with. It's a tactile experience. So if you're going to, spend the money to get vinyl, think about having it fold out with lyric sheets or whatever, just make it feel special. And then when people buy it, wow them with extras, put in a handwritten note, make some lyric sheets, print a postcard, make a ticket that they can give to a friend that invites them to the Thursday night cooking club or whatever, just like, so as a way of that access and community being built, but grown by your audience because they didn't just get a CD in the mail. It came with all this other stuff that they're like, wow, this person really cares.
Yeah, on that note, when I started, like when people buy albums from our Bandzoogle website, I made this little card that looks like this signed. It's this nice photo, glossy photo with our signatures on it. And on the back, it has our social media links and just says a big thank you for supporting us. And then I throw in some stickers. And so when someone buys that album and they open the package, the experience is better than they expected. Sort
Yeah.
of that extra delighting your customers with going above and beyond. And so it's not just, yeah, I got the thing I ordered. It's like, oh, cool, I got all this extra stuff. And it's things that, that for me, after, pricing out, it's negligible.
And then before you can delight anyone, you simply have to deliver the thing. So
That's true.
also have in place a plan to, get your mailers all taken care of, make sure your email or whatever it is notifying you that there's a new order or whatever you got to do to get those mailers to the post office or FedEx or whatever, get them out. That's honestly like one of my biggest issues is like,
Oh,
I'm
I
pretty good
agree.
about it for weeks. And then there'll be like a week or two where like I miss it. And then suddenly a month has gone by and I'm like, oh crap, I haven't sent anything. So don't be me.
Yeah. I got it down to a science, but then what really throws me for a loop is when I get international orders because
Oh yeah.
sometimes I'm paying them to to take the CDs.
Yeah, few other things to run through real quick is don't be afraid to give your fans a deal. And in fact, the discount may be the very thing that gets them sort of over that fence of actually purchasing. And I know when people put new albums out, they kind of feel like, why would I give a discount? This is brand new. People should just want it. Get over yourself. People love deals. And particularly if you've offered some sort of behind the scenes thing, some experience, some access. If someone's tuned in to 4 weeks in a row of your cooking club, give them the 50% off on the new album deal because those will be the people most likely to actually take you up on it. If you're running ads, we talked a lot about this recently, run ads to the right audience. One question that comes up a lot is windowing. And normally, Kevin, you and I have advised against windowing, which is the process of like putting an album out on, let's say, iTunes first so that everyone has to download it and then weeks later you put it out on Spotify, or months later. I still don't like the idea of digital windowing at all. I think it's a terrible idea, but I have no problem with you finishing your album and offering it directly to your fans or your email list, whatever, first, months and months and months ahead of its official release, because you're really not doing a public messaging. You're not telling your story outwardly at that point. It's to your existing audience. Fine, give them the album physically, they can listen. I actually see that working very well for artists. So
Yeah, the
um,
idea of like the physical or the download being available only through your website first, it's a great way to generate money. That I would agree with. Yeah, because then you're talking to people that already bought in on you, and it's less about them having access to listen to the music files, but more about showing their support and feeling like they get early access to something cool. You mentioned several things in there. I know we're going to do a follow-up episode about pricing for for physical goods and merch and even digital goods that we were putting this together and thinking, man, there's just too much here. We gotta cut that out and save it for another episode. But you did mention something about pricing and deals, and I think that's one thing that the album gives you more opportunity when talking about releasing an album for success. When you have an album, the value perception is different with your fans. Whether or not they only listen to one song or whatever, it's different. Set that aside, but the perception of the value is different. And so I think it gives you some pricing options and some the ability to say this week only it's $5 from my website before the official release, and a way for you to drive revenue that may not have been there before. Where when you have singles, you're not going to get more than a dollar, and buying something for a dollar is not exciting, especially when you're going to have access to it. So I think there's some creativity you can have around campaigns to just think about the album, forget about how many songs it is, and this weird thing that we've said, oh, once every song's worth a dollar, so 10 songs is $10. Set that aside. It's like, no, just use it as an opportunity to drive revenue by getting creative with bundling or how you want to sell it to your fans, because especially if it's digital, like selling downloads, it doesn't matter. It doesn't
right.
matter.
A few more quick items to run through is map out a promotion strategy in advance. And you want to do that because a lot of the effort that goes into promoting a record has to be done before the record is out. And it's crucial to get it done before then, because once the record is out, you'll have all this other work to do. So get that done in advance, map it out, and don't underestimate the value of video content in those efforts. So that could be casual TikTok stuff, but also lyric videos, live videos, Spotify canvases. There's a whole bunch of types of video content you should be making. Once the music is out, or once you're running ads or anything like that, budget time in your day to respond, because whether it's a comment on Instagram or someone writes you back in your email newsletter or whatever, it means a lot for them to hear from you. Or even if it's just a thumbs up, hey, I appreciate your comment, do it. Because if you let that linger, you're basically instructing your audience that they shouldn't interact with your stuff, that you don't care. So make sure you cut out some time in your day for that. If you can, map all this stuff out on a content calendar so your ducks are in a row. Kevin mentioned the release plan generator, which we have at release.cdbaby.com.
Yes.
Plan a lot of this. Plan a release party. Celebrate with your audience, whether it's a live show or a live stream. We all still presumably like to perform music, so do that. If you don't want to perform, you could do a listening party and just talk about your record. I would cautiously advise you to investigate PR opportunities. Hiring a publicist can be expensive, and if you don't have a lot going for you already, it's probably a waste of money. But once you get to a sufficient place in your career, publicists can really help open doors that you can't do or don't have time to do on your own. And similarly, you could effectively run your own playlisting campaign, but I wouldn't spend a ton of time trying to reach every playlister in your genre. Find, a handful of playlists you really enjoy, that you think your music belongs on, and make an effort to reach out to those people. Doesn't have to be right when the album is new. This is something you can follow up on over the next 6 to 12 months, which leads me to my last point, which is once your album is out, don't disappear. You're going to have a lot of content on that album, which means you also have a lot of angles back into the content. So it's fine to keep telling the story as long as you're doing it in new ways.
All right. Lots of good information there. I think we made the case on releasing albums, Chris.
All right, it's done.
I think we did it. Yeah, it's such a good part of the release strategy. That's why I always get frustrated when I hear people say, "No, it's just singles." Now I'm like, "Well, sure, you go do that." The smart people are going to do both, because it's very short-sighted to think that it's all just about dropping songs one after the other. And there are people that strategy works. I think as a whole, just my frustration is when people say, "No, this is only it now," and realize, no, there is a bigger ecosystem to play in and strategy to think about. And if you cut yourself off from that, you're just cutting yourself off from opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's what we want artists to understand, all the aspects of releasing music, that it's not just one thing that you're supposed to do, that there's lots of options and it's a choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
All right. If you've got a question or a comment or want to weigh in on something that you're doing, some marketing strategy or tactics that are working or not working, or want to comment on releasing albums, we want to hear from you. You can call our listener line at 360-524-2209, or you can email us at podcast@cdbabypodcast.com, and we'll get you on the show.
Yeah. And if you have scam emails that you have received,
That's right.
Don't be afraid to share those. We like to laugh at them.
I got one and I deleted it before, and I went, "Oh my gosh, I should have kept that." It was similar to the last one. I read a variation on that, but I'm sure I'll get more.
Yeah.
And I'll have to dig up one of the ones I get on Instagram all the time. They're so tacky and hideous looking. It's like nobody even falls for this, I don't think, but it's probably worth sharing because I'm sure somebody does. Otherwise, people wouldn't do it. But yeah. And don't forget DIYmusiciancon.com. Get your tickets for the conference. It's going to be an amazing weekend. You're going to want to be there. You can hang with Chris and I. That alone is worth the price of admission, Chris.
Heck yeah. A whole weekend with us.
A whole weekend with us. We have to be there. We can't leave. So we're your captive audience. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Me too. And
And
you
I
have
don't know-
songs to learn or relearn.
Yes,
before
I
you
do.
go.
I do. I do. And I don't know if it's showing up on video, but there has been this fly like flying through the room. We've had the
I saw it a couple
rainiest
times.
we've had the rainiest spring in 81 years in the Northwest, which means it's rained a lot. So we have all these flies and mosquitoes that are completely unusual for us up here, but it's like the mosquitoes are like a Louisiana swamp up here right now. It's just crazy. Never seen anything like it here.
Oh, God.
And yeah, it's just,
Hopefully they're not
Yeah,
bringing all their tropical diseases with them.
they probably are. I mean, if precedent for the last couple of years continues. But anyway, that's all we got. So
All
yeah,
right.
get your tickets. We're looking forward to seeing you in August, and more episodes on the way.
See you soon.
Take it easy.